Hello, good evening from a sunny evening in the UK. It's unusual, but it's been here this week. Hopefully for a few more days we'll have sun. So thank you guys for joining us tonight. We're gonna talk devsecops, security champions, and if we have time, we'll discuss whatever we want to discuss for the summit sessions and the training sessions. So because you're here, I do assume you know a bit about the summit. But if anybody feels like they don't, just make some noise and we'll discuss. Otherwise, over to you, Dennis, and I will start sharing my screen to show you guys the draft agendas for both training sessions and
So I think maybe a good topic to start with is we were just talking about the security champions, and I feel that if you go back to the history of the summits, right? I was actually telling the story that there was a summit probably 2 or 3 years ago where we were 20 of us around the room, and we kind of asked the question, anybody here has experience with security champions, right? Because it was not very known, and actually just about everybody in the room raised their hands, and it was really interesting because it's almost everybody goes, wow, I'm not the only one who's trying to do this, right? I'm not the only one who's actually trying to do a security champions program, because I think at the time there was only about 3 or 4 posts on the web, right, and things about it. But I feel that we have evolved. I feel that as an industry, the concept of security champions seems to have taken place. What I think would be really interesting for us to turn the tables around is and to think about what do we want our security champions to learn and what we want them to experience in the summit, right? And it's almost try to think of a roadmap for how do we build security champions, right? So because we have that challenge. So Abbas is here from my security team. And we're starting a program of getting security champions to getting them on board. And I think the challenge is always the one, like, what does the training program looks like? What does the curriculum almost look like to get a security champion on board? And I think actually Dida is a good example. Like, she's a very great case study of a security champion, right? We almost need to figure out what is the roadmap for her to learn, like what are the paths that you might have. And the beauty of the summit is we can actually experiment. We can actually do this in practice. Because I think that we should do a push to attract security champions to the summits, and we should kind of put them all together. Because fundamentally, they all are the same characteristic. They've been giving a mandate, they kind of deer in headlights. They probably were pushed or nudged right into it. Some might be very excited about security, but again, they don't have a lot of experience. And they all kind of have the questions is, what am I supposed to do? What's my responsibilities?
Yeah.
How does it work? Right? And I've done multiple programs like this, right? And I know that, you can generate a lot of energy and almost, create a security champions program. But I also know that in the case in the past when I've done it, I failed a bit because when I stopped putting energy, the whole thing went, a bit south. And I feel that we should think about what is the things we can do at the summit for security champions and actually create a nice plan for them, right? And say, look, you are all together here, you are as a team. And if you're a security champion, this is almost what we would recommend the summit program to be. Okay. So when you look at things like training, it's very interesting because we can think of the training from a security champion point of view. Does it cover the areas that we believe security champions should be knowledgeable about or have experience?
So good thing that I put all these sessions in then, but yeah. Obviously we will need to find trainers for each session, and we currently only have people signed up to give the training for the colored ones. All the gray ones, they are without a moderator.
Yeah. Actually, so I need to update from yesterday. So we got a couple from the call yesterday that said they will do 3 of the worldly maps. And some of them. So I'll update when we do the thing over the weekend. But what are your thoughts? From the participants here, like when you think from a security champion almost skill set, and what do we want to teach them? What do we want to expose them at the summit?
Can I, first of all, from my very modest experience, security champions, the most important bit in the beginning, before you have the program and all of this, but the most important bit is to how to present the security champion idea to potential security champions. Basically, I because I have a modest experience, just a small experience, so we put some slides and we pushed them, and it looked like really, it looked really bad in the beginning, because we're saying if you are a security champion, you don't have to have any security background. But we can teach you, we can give you the skill, but you need to do this and this and this and this, and kind of scared people away. So basically, I think approaching this, like, especially when we are talking with developers and development teams, we just need to make sure that we tell them that your skill in security is not really important. This is gonna add too much to your development profile because you did security testing, not security testing, like you were a security champion, and all your applications, whatever you developed, were like security focused and all of this. So basically, this is the first thing came into my mind, because I did scare a couple of people in the beginning, and they didn't like it. Was like, I'm hitting them with information, you need to do this. Basically, so to present, first of all, to present the program as simple as possible, and just to make it a delicate, interactive.
We need to be able to give them expectations, like
Yes.
we will need your 2-3 hours every month or something, so that they can gauge if they can do it or not. Because they're all busy, everyone's busy, and it's like their personal time, even though it creates it makes them a better programmer and they code more quality code. It's still them and maybe their managers allowing them to do this as an extra activity.
Yeah, from my perspective, I've seen two very different outcomes from trying to build a security champion. So it was in the same company that I was working in. One where the central cybersecurity team was trying to push out into the different delivery teams and say, you need to be a security champion, or you need to develop some security champions. And that just didn't work, because people didn't want to step forward and say, I'll be a security champion. Now, where I have seen success is in teams where somebody who's passionate about security or has shown some real interest in, not just passing interest, but real interest in security. And basically, as a security person myself, I was then encouraging him to do stuff, to keep building that security and giving him the confidence that actually what he's doing is the right thing. And, like, since I've now left that company, it's nice to see that he's gone on to become an AWS security architect, which, in the 2 years that I was with him, that's quite impressive progress. But the reason why he was successful is because he wanted to do it. He was empowered to do it. And I think that's the message that we need to give these people, is that it's not, if we're talking to leaders and managers, you don't impose it. You don't impose a security champion. You need to identify people that want to become champions and nurture them into the role. And that's the role that we need to probably, the angle we probably need to take here is how to nurture security champions, not train them, but nurture them. And maybe the training is, how do we do the nurturing? How do we train people to nurture them? How do we train security people to nurture the engineers that want to become security champions?
That's a good topic on itself. It's quite hard for the traditional security people to even understand what engineers do and how they think. It's been quite a transition for me personally.
But the most successful security champions network I've created was one where we actually had a representative from every team, and there were about 25 individuals there, and actually the most success out of it was the fact that forum actually allowed him to communicate across the teams. So what was really interesting was to see, first of all, the showing of the dissemination of security knowledge, because you'll see an issue that a team created and then we expose it and we learn from it, and you can see the other ones going, ooh, okay, maybe I'm going to learn, I'm not going to do that. But also allowed to push a lot of interesting solutions across the board, but also the cross-fertilization of ideas. I could actually see individuals from multiple teams communicating in ways that they weren't before, because you have to remember, in most organizations, you actually don't have those forums. In most organizations, the challenge between some teams talking to another team, although theoretically you can, it doesn't sometimes happen in practice. So the security champions, when you have a representative from each team, also gives you, that understanding, and also that heavy weight of engineering knowledge, which I think sometimes the security teams lack a lot.
So the other angle, of course, which is mentioned there, is how do you turn security people into engineering champions?
Yeah.
That's the other angle to look at.
Absolutely. Right. And that's, and security is very, very good at that, right? We sometimes we're very good at prescribed stuff, right? But although I think these days, again, that is starting to disappear a bit, because if you don't speak the developer language, you get ignored, right? Because actually the teams, when they want to do it, they'll focus and they spend the time and the effort, right? So, but the angle here, so the nurture, I think, is a good, interesting question, because what are the skill sets? What are the things that we should be exposing security champions to, right? So I always find that hacking, breaking, showing security in practice, showing the cool side of security, right? Like the interesting hacks, the interesting, things that makes, their life more effective, or they learn something. That is always very interesting.
I have issue with that, because it is always very interesting and it's always very popular, but what you're making is pen testers. You're getting people wanting to be pen testers out of that. You don't get so much on the blue team side, because they see, the hacking, the breaking, getting through security, that's sexy, that's cool. And they never
we're not talking about
move over to the other side.
So we were talking about it as a training method, so people, the engineers can see how their code can be broken into.
That's better, but it's still, this is how you break it. It's still very attack
focused. Do you have data
focused.
to support that?
No, just experience. But I don't think anyone has data to support the other side either.
Well, no, I would say that every time that I exposed an engineer to hacking techniques and to how to think like that, they come out better engineers at the end.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
If you're trying to get them to be a more security aware engineer, yes, I'd agree, because they think more about how their code is broken then. But there is more to security than that side, and ideally you want a security champion who's going to be looking at other things than just the engineering. They're going to be considering risk and business drivers as well.
I agree. I guess my only question is, do we have security champions that are ready at the maturity level to have that conversation?
That depends entirely on the company. And that depends entirely on the people. So there are some who I would say definitely are, and there are others who aren't. Yeah. But it's where you want to aim it.
I would say they should be able to, at least, like, if they are in a team or a squad, their squad assets, and they can help and escalate for any security issues, can be involved in risk assessment, let's say, if they are in development an application or something like that, and be involved in all security incidents, promote security awareness in the team. I mean, I think we can start with this, and it can thrive later on. But I mean, this can be a startup, so they can be the voice of information security in their team. And probably, if you, as most companies do, they have general corporate security policies. If they're aware of them, they can help to have kind of contingency plans in there for their teams as well to enforce them.
So going back to what should we do? What should we do at the summit that will help security champions? So assume that we'll have a number of security champions turning up, right? What are the kind of sessions that are for them, right? Because I think we probably want to have a session for how to deploy security champion networks, how to nurture them, etc. But they are there will be a session for the security community, right? I think I'm interested to explore the idea of what would it look like from a security champion point of view? What can we do better? Or what are sessions that we should be doing? And I actually like your risk idea, James, because I think, you know, we maybe should say, hey, you know, you can go for the hacking stuff, which is cool, but actually an evolution of security champion is actually into defensive coding.
I was going to say, one other thing to look at might be instant response tabletop or forensic tabletop exercise. How to do a proper instant response business continuity plan. You get the excitement of, oh look, the Amazon data center in Ireland has caught fire. How does our code deal with it? How does our application deal with it? How does our system recover? How long are we down for? What do we do about it?
That is actually a really cool idea. Have you guys done tabletop exercises here? Because I've done a couple, and I think if we could replicate some of that, it's actually something that can even work remotely. Have any you guys have experience with that?
Well, yes.
But when it's tabletop, the usual stuff is like paper-based or document-based. So we might be talking about something more hands-on. I'm getting that sense.
Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be hands-on, but it can be.
Well, I think we can spice it up, right? Like actually, you know, what you just connected in my head was actually the kind of the quiz thing, because I keep trying to find you know, interesting activities that we can do as a group, right? Or that kind of have a bit of that social thing. And actually tabletop exercises could actually be quite interesting to do, because you can simulate, right? And you can go to town. In fact, there was this one I did at the OWASP event in London that was, actually I don't even think it was OWASP, but it was a really cool, which was this guy who had a game that he had a number of points. So what would happen is you get, and it was really cool, it was security incidents by sprint. And what it meant was we would simulate multiple sprints. And you basically, as a developer and a security person, you had you know, only 20 points to spend. So the exercise was actually to say, hey, you know, you're about to launch your website. What do you do? Do you invest in, you know, single sign-on? Do you invest here? Do you invest in your backups? Do you invest over there? Do you do this? Do you do that? And then you make a bunch of choices. And then depending on your choices, what happened next, right, would be, you know, reflected on those. But we can actually do a variation of these, or tabletop exercises, where we can come up with a bunch of scenarios, which is actually, I think we mentioned a couple of days ago, the whole cornucopia game and the whole threat modeling game are a variation of this. But they will be very relevant for example, developer team, right? Because you try to give them real choices.
Well, you can set them at almost anyone. So you can do it for developers to marketing if you feel like it. I've done some fun ones in the past with marketing teams.
Yeah. No, I think that would be really interesting to do that. I guess so do you wanna have a go trying to organize a bit of this?
You mean James, right?
Yeah, James.
I was hoping someone else was going to speak up. Yeah, I'll look at what I can do around planning out a scenario, make a few fake news stories and come up with a company and go from there. As training, workshop, or summit thingy.
I think we can run that as a training session, right? Like a 2, 3, 4 hour thing. And you don't have to do the whole thing, right? But I feel that, you know, so for example, the idea of, you can even give multi-personas on the event, right? So let's say, you know, the 8 of us were involved, each of us will have a role, and then you actually read, you know, as time goes by, it's almost, you can actually have a sequence of events that will last 1 or 2 hours or 3 hours, right? And that's, you know, you could say on the first hour, you will say this, and then on an hour and a half, the other person will say, well, this just happened and that just happened. And then it's about how you respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be better to pair up? So if there were roles to dish out, instead of saying, right, there's 8 roles, there's 8 of you, you guys pick a role, and you might end up with a role you don't like. Instead of kind of working in isolation, why don't we pair people up so that they can simulate that role and also bounce ideas? So we don't know what people's backgrounds are, and so normally pairing up with, and people come from different backgrounds and experience, etc., can, you know, at least it will build their confidence in developing into a new area.
Actually, and you can even have a case where each role decides by vote, right, what they will do, right?
Yeah.
No, I think that's a brilliant idea, because that makes it very social. So what we then say is, you say, look, on this particular event, there's going to be 5 roles. You know, there's going to be the CEO, there's going to be the developer, the engineer, there's going to be the attacker, there's going to be the risk analyst, there's going to be, you know, a couple of roles involved on it, right? The media person or the head of, you know, development or something. And then we can, you know, basically the event can play out across the multiple scenarios, right?
Yeah. But just going back to an earlier point mentioned earlier, bad choice of words there, around how to nurture or train the security champions. I guess we can try and source crowd different scenarios based on people's different experience in different organizations to capture the sort of challenges they face, trying to break into this space, or when they work with teams, because nobody knows everything, right? So there's going to be gap in knowledge. How do you actually identify an issue within a team? You don't just say there's a problem, go and fix it. You might be a bit more proactive and say, look, I've identified this problem, but I don't really understand the technology to know how to fix it. Can I work with you to find a solution? Or maybe you do know the technology and you can derive a solution, therefore you do a PR or something to say, look, I found this problem, here's a proposed suggestion to fix it. What do you guys think? So, you know, illustrate different approaches. So more the soft skills to build those relationships with people, and also expand on your own technical knowledge. But don't be shy to fess up that you don't know it.
Yeah. And in a balanced team, right? That's what you want, right? In a balanced team, you want the ones that can just accelerate and get stuff, but you also want the ones that can take a step back and think about it and explain it in English, or have a more nuanced view that actually makes sure that we don't go into rabbit holes. So, for example, I actually had sometimes experience of having, well, they call themselves non-technical, but they were very good operation individuals, that they were better incident response handlers than technical individuals, because they didn't go into massive tangents and they were much better at communication on what's going on, and they could delegate effectively. And sometimes you get the more experienced technical individuals and they go on rabbit holes, which actually doesn't add a lot of value, and you miss the point, right, on sometimes what we're trying to do. Exactly.
You want someone to kind of be the glue to draw out the best of each individual and their skill set. So collectively, you're going to come out a lot better.
So this would be quite interesting, because if you group them, right, in multiple areas, right, and then you ask, for example, a decision, what would you do now, right, to the different teams, you'll be even just an interesting delta to see how they decide.
Yeah, or maybe they can't agree, and therefore it's fine for them to also present back to the wider team to say, look, we've come up with these options, we've shortlisted these 2, but we don't know which one to go for. So therefore, here's our options and the pros and cons for each. What do you guys think?
So Michael, I think you should also join with James this team, right? Because I think you're clearly thinking in the right way.
I'll see if I can pair up with James to work something.
I mean, I'm happy for you to do all the work if you want. But no, I think if we come up with a scenario and just have the narrative running behind it, and then it's just the teams looking at it, info drops, we can drop in on them depending on what they do, which can be as simple as, okay, you looked through the logs and you found something here, including some nice red herrings that can send them right down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Look,
which day shall we have it? Like,
I think we need to evolve this. I think this is a good example of something like let's continue talking. Let's have a session next week about it, because I think that we need to come up with a plan for what it would look like and kind of the narrative. So Michael and James, throw me into one of the channels. Are you guys on Slack, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because what I like about this idea, right, is that, and this is also quite important, right? For the summit session to be effective, you actually sometimes need to move away from the very rigid structure. So the irony here is that this session that we're talking about will be a massive learning opportunity, right? Will be a training session, but we're doing it in a different way. We're doing it in a much more interactive. Because it's kind of like, why is the Phoenix Project such a great book, right? Because it tells, right, a really important message within the story, right? So we can actually have, and actually Simon Water does the same thing. One of the sessions he does, he walks you through a scenario. Look, he's a company. They need to decide where to go. What's your recommendation? Do you invest? Do you disinvest? Do you go here? Do you go there? So I think these scenarios that we're talking about, I think it's worthwhile us having a session on a couple of those, and then make sure that we can spice it up with security, right? And I think we can make it quite interesting, right? Because some of these calls, it's basically like, look, do you pull the plug on the data center? Do you tell the ICO, right? Do you tell your customers? Do you, shut down the website? Do you push a fix that could actually break production and affect 10% of the profits, right? Do you, stop dealing with a supplier because that has impacts to your customers? So we can actually make it some cases where the solutions are not that straightforward, right? It also calls into account your ethics, your sense of responsibility, your knowledge, your positioning, right? I think this will be quite interesting.
So what, we have to bribe someone with money or bitcoins?
Well, look, here's a perfect example, right?
Let's not go down the ethical hole of do we pay the ransom or not. That's a whole other session. It's one I'd love to see, the ethics of do you pay the ransom, but
that could be part of the challenge, right? Look, so here's the thing, right? So I think the best way to deal, for example, with that question is that could be one of the scenarios. And some of these you can say, look, there isn't a right or wrong answer. There's an answer at the moment in time, right? And you might say pay, others might say don't pay, right?
So with the scenarios, I mean, James talked about an instant response type of situation. You've mentioned a few other things, which are quite high-level, generic, corporate. But if we're kind of trying to simulate different scenarios to train the security champions, maybe these are a bit too much to ask for.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about it, right? Because what we want is actually have scenarios that it affects them, right?
Yeah. You can always take one of the higher level scenarios and decompose it to get the area that affects them, because there will be something in there.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I think that's a good north, right? I think a good north is that we're doing this from the point of view of the security champions, because actually most of the tabletops exercise I've done was done from the point of view of the executives, and I always felt that is the wrong way around.
So I have to think about logistics as well. So the summit schedule is pretty dense. Well, we want to do it in the training week, maybe getting rid of one of the OSINT CTF nights, because these were initially going to be 3 hours. Now they're 5 hours. I think 5 hours will be enough for one OSINT CTF. And we could do...
Don't worry about it. If there's enough individuals, they can do that, right? This goes in parallel to that, right? It's Darwinian, right?
So in the summit schedule, when I look at it, it's quite overlapping with, so this session will probably be 2 hours at least. And the days that we have DevSecOps are quite full.
No, I think the exercise should be, we should try to do that on the week before the summit.
Yep, I agree.
Because, and I think if realistically, it will be on that week too, right? We'll be on that either Thursday or Friday, right? And the reality is, look, I can help to run this, right? You know, the backup plan is if I need to run this, I'm happy to do this, right? At least to put a bit of energy on it. Although I can actually find, I already know a number of individuals that I'm going to bring into this conversation. But I think if Michael and James and others who want to be involved, if we can come up at least with a first skeleton of what it could look like, it'll be easier to attract both other participants and other key players that can play a good role on it. But
I put it on the Wednesday of the 10th of June.
Yeah. But I would actually run this, you know, across, you know, at least from till 2, you know, this needs 4 or 5 hours to do it properly.
This is 5 hours.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Because it will take time, right? And it's actually, it doesn't take a lot of time from an organizer point of view after a while, because you're just feeding in, right? You're letting the teams come up with the things, right? But no, I think this is great. I think it's a really cool idea. I think this solves, this ties a lot of threads I had in my head about how to create these events, right? And the reality is that we could expand this, right? Let's try with one, but you know, we could have one focus on execs. We could have one focus on risk. We can have multiple scenarios, because this is a lot more real than.
No, we can do that in the same exercise. So a few people can look at it from the executive's perspective. A few people will. So we will have different personas at the session.
But I like the idea of doing this from a threat modeling point of view, from security champion point of view. Because also, so Abbas here has, for me, also an important role, because I think from a summit point of view, the summit is a success if Abbas, who heads IT and security, right, can take materials that he can do it for his, you know, the members of his company, right, that are not at the summit. Right. So it's very important that, you know, we think about that. One of the audiences that we have for some of these things is also the individuals that are trying to push, in this case, security champions networks, right, across, you know, their companies. So we can give them materials that they can then and maps and you know and plans for it.
That will help a lot, to be honest.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the thing we put in is the scenario exercise. So for the other, we will still need to have a session at the summit to produce that outcome. Well, that's
an interesting thing, right? So we could have a session at the summit to talk about the decisions, right? Now that would be interesting, right? Where you can present.
Post-mortem.
Well, yes, you know, you can present, you know, what happened, right? You know, we you know, like the ransomware is an interesting example, right? You know, so, you know, we can have, you know, an opinion, but if we have data that said, look, you know, 70% of participants all decided to pay, you know, it's like, or actually 90% of the participants decided not to pay, right, on this situation. That is a valid thing. You know, 80% of the participants decided not to report to the ICO, right?
Well, you know, paying the ransom is becoming illegal. It has already become illegal in many states, and I'm hoping it will become illegal here as well. So
technically it is. So
it's really not a question. It's illegal. You shouldn't do it.
Yeah, until you have to make that decision yourself. Then you check your perception of what's the right thing to do.
For me, it does get fun.
Smiling about this?
Sorry?
Should we be worried that Dennis is smiling and giggling about this?
No, I just been involved in a couple, right? And I know that, you know,
you have already
the conversations, right, are tough, right? You know, and you know, I'll camp on the side of saying you should never pay, right? But
I don't say
but there is a but all the time.
My line
but,
is,
right?
if it impacts human life, then you might consider paying, even if it's illegal. But if it's anything else, I think.
Okay, so if the problem is that it's illegal, bear in mind it's illegal to lose access to personal data. So if your personal data has been wrapped up in ransomware, it's illegal not to pay the ransom and make it available again, and you'll be fined if you don't. and it's illegal to pay the ransom because you're funding organized crime, which is illegal.
Yeah.
So there is no good decision. I'm very much in favor of don't pay because that destroys the business model and eventually works. But for any individual company, it's a much harder decision than that principle of, okay, I care about the whole community. I don't want anyone to pay because then it goes away.
It's like negotiating with terrorists, to be honest. So do you negotiate with them or not? So it depends.
And the answer is usually not publicly.
There you go. There you go.
I guess the solution is to have a strong BCP, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, right? That's the thing, right? The solution for this is that you want to be in a position where you don't have to negotiate. You want to be in a position where it's a pain, but you don't have any assets in there that are not recoverable. But I've seen situations where they take the time to own your network. By the time they encrypt a whole lot, you don't have easy solutions left.
Well, it's not just a backup issue now. So, it's not recovering the data only. They post your personal data, they sell it to others. So that's it's always evolving.
Well, it's a great topic for the summit. I actually think that we should. Let's okay. I would say I wouldn't start here in our scenario, but I think if we feel that our scenario is mature enough, I think we should introduce this there, but not as the big event, but just as a another interesting metric for us to measure. So cool. Okay, any other kind of ideas on the kind of things that we can do for security champions that will help them on this, on the summit?
How to approach a security team, how to get them to bring you on as a security champion, how to talk to them if you're interested in the area.
Okay.
Because we're talking about how we want to nurture security champions, but there is another side to it. There are people who are quite happy to, or will bite someone's hand off to get any sort of involvement in security, and they just don't know how to get started.
Exactly, and many companies still don't have any championship programs.
So how to push for that sort of program from the other side of things.
I like it. It's like guerrilla security champion, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
In fact, I was once involved in one of those. It was really cool because I actually got a lot of developers to do almost like a security champions program, but the global security team was completely MIA, right? but I was actually able to, because I was working a lot with developers, I was actually able to create a group with them amongst them. And then and half the time I have to keep coming up with excuses why the security team wasn't doing more officially, because they should have. But I think that's a really cool thing, right? I think guerrilla security champions, and which is basically what to do when your current security team is not on the right side of history, right?
Yeah, when they're siloed off somewhere and saying security is ours.
So I attended.
There's always the
Go ahead.
Sorry, it's just a quick one. So I've kind of been in that situation. Well, I've been in a situation where I've been parachuted into a team, and then I've heard that senior security managers have actually said Michael's gone rogue, he's gone native. So there's that political angle that I think we need to maybe surface and address.
That's me as well. And today Mario had a session with their own company about DevSecOps and what do these teams mean, and he presented it so well. It made me realize a lot of things. So anyway, I can't explain it well, but there are different archetypes of security people, the governance people, the people who are engineers, and something else. I can't remember. But it was really good, and it made a lot of sense. I saw myself moving from one box to the other in the last couple of years.
So can you expand on that? Like, I feel that this idea of of actually tackling the security champion from the angle of what do you do when you don't have good support from a security team, right? When the security team is, because let's be clear, right? When the security team in the right side of history, when they're doing the right thing, when they're pushing the stuff, when they put in the reward, it's kind of easy, right? Like it kind of will happen. But I think in a lot of organizations, is that bottom-up approach that is failing, right? And so what can we do to even just reinforce them that they are right? They should care about these things, even if today their current security team, like threat modeling, for example, like you shouldn't need a mandate from a security team to do threat modeling, because threat modeling adds value to development, regardless of security.
I think it comes from the leadership. Leadership needs to empower people to have that collaboration between themselves. And they need resources as well.
Well, but I think the point here is, what do you do when there isn't that leadership?
So you go rogue and you create it yourself. You don't ask for permission. That's what I did.
I think the security champions, if we show them the importance of the role from the perspective Dennis was talking about, that the security team is too busy. Let me give you a small just example, like just an experience I had myself. So basically, in security teams, you always have security incident when you have developers pushing code and all of this. We as security team, we created some incident playbooks, like security incident playbooks. So if something happened, so you're gonna have someone running an incident playbook, general one, and then if it is a specific security attack, let's say a storage account had got compromised, they run another security book, and that will help like the security team to start resolving the incident and working on the break fix. But sometimes when you have, let's say, multiple products, multiple small development teams working in let's say you have 10, 15, and security team all like 3-4 engineers, you don't have the capacity to cover all of that. So if you have a good security champion who had good training, I think this will help a lot. And it's not only like always like the security team is not doing their job. They are busy, but I mean, I put that, it's like when you put security policies and you push them to a company and say, these are your security guidelines. You need to comply with them, and after that, it's up to the team managers or squad managers to do this. So if we can get the security champion, we give them this culture and this way of thinking, I think any development team will thrive in terms of security, and it will help a lot.
I agree. But let's not sugarcoat this to say that in a lot of companies, the security team is still part of the problem.
True.
Right?
When
where
they
the security
keep on
team
being the
is the one.
gatekeepers.
Look, if a security team sees someone like Michael going and working with the developers and has any connotation that that's not an amazing thing, I'm telling you that team is already on the wrong side of history. Right? Because in fact, every security team objective should be to reduce what they do, because we should be delegating and automating as much as possible, into the teams out there, right? Because security doesn't scale when you have a global center. I think global centers are great for energy and knowledge and certain projects, but it's from the bottom up that you scale. Now, here's a question. Can we do the same thing, scenarios for DevSecOps? And in fact, there's a massive correlation with what we just talked about with actually DevSecOps, because DevSecOps is all about injecting security practices in a development pipeline, right?
Yeah, it's just security champions with a different name.
Or it's part of it becomes part of the nature of
There's a slightly different take on what security means in a DevSecOps environment, though, isn't there? So with DevSecOps, it is also DevOps. It's about empowering the delivery teams to take control of everything that they do. So that's basically, building experiment, coming up with theories, building experiments, seeing those theories through to development, and those experiments through to development, and then, pivoting or progressing based on what the feedback is. You don't have to go outside the team. It's about being local. So therefore, security needs to be local as well to that team. Now, I always felt security isn't a person, it's a culture within that team. And of course, DevSecOps is about building small and building out. So if you get a DevSecOps team, one DevSecOps team that has that, that security mindset, whether it's because they've already got somebody who's security proficient, or more than proficient, is actually an expert in security that's already part of the team, and that team's ethos starts to spread out. I've seen this before where you just build one team first and you start building other teams around it. It's like small incremental changes. So to say, well, this in a security team or this in a DevOps team works, this doesn't work. Okay, let's now expand on that and let's move into another team with what we know and build that out. But it's about empowering the developers to understand security and knowing what security means in their roles. So it's not just engineers, it's testers, it's the infrastructure engineers, their operations. It's about, they need to understand what security means to their roles. I don't think it's a case that you need one security champion that understands all their security for the whole team. They have the central core team that they can go to for that. It's what their role is in making the propositions that they're building secure. And I think that's what DevSecOps means. It's not about having security champions as such. It's about having a security mindset within the DevOps team and the tools that go with it. So security teams will need to develop the tools that these teams can use, like so automated testing and so forth. So that's my take on what DevSecOps is.
So we need to take this description that Glenn just did and create another short video of it. That was absolutely brilliant. I think that was a great. I think this conversation we should try to grab a couple of those because I think they're really great nuggets, right? So, but okay. So question for you: wouldn't by design anybody who does DevSecOps is also a security champion?
No, not necessarily, because I wouldn't expect them to understand security outside of their roles.
But I wouldn't expect a security champion to understand security outside of their role, right?
It's almost the end goal of a good security champion program. You no longer have the champions who are figures to look up to. You've just got everyone knows how security applies to their role and applies it.
It's a maturity, isn't it?
Yeah.
So look, by design, I would say that the security champion is just an entity in a company that, in a team that can be one of the first points of call from a security question point of view, and is focusing on embedding a number of security practices, right? So if you look at a DevSecOps, that's exactly what they do, right?
Well, once it becomes everyone in that organization becomes that security champion, then you have real DevSecOps.
But you have to be careful because I have a controversial view on this one, but I take the view that the less the individual team members have to care about security, the more secure you are, right? Because a good example is that, as you automate things, you stop having to care about those, right? So we have to be careful that if we rely on the whole organization to be security experts, it would never scale.
I'd say use the word think rather than care. Everyone should still care about it. They just shouldn't have to think about it.
Well, fair enough. No, I think that's fine. Yes, correct. Yeah. Should I think about security? Yes. Yeah, but the same way that I would have to care about performance, I have to care about resilience, I have to care about, ethics, I have to care about all those things. Yes, absolutely, right? But if we rely on those individuals becoming security experts, then it doesn't scale, right? What scales is for them to, when they have to focus on an area of security, have access to the knowledge about it, right? Yeah. So if you look at DevSecOps, that's all about pushing security left, right? In a way, pushing security to the early stages of the pipeline so that it just happens and you get the feedback loops.
I don't agree that shift left. I think the security, I think, is about embedding all the way through from left to right. It's not just a shift left process. That's my point.
Yeah, fair enough. But most organizations, security happens totally to the right, right? At the end.
Oh, yeah. So it happens just at the right. Yeah. What we need to do is expand left.
So spread left, not shift left.
Spread left,
with the right, left, and center.
Well, put it at the place of highest leverage, right? Put it at the place where you get the most value. For the practice. And look, there's a value on pen test, right? But I always take the view that the final test should be a validation of what you know. If you find something new at the end, then you have a massive problem, right? Because that means stuff is broken in your pipeline.
Yeah, but you're by the nature, you're always going to find something new at the end. It's about discovering the least number of new things at the end.
Well, I would argue, like, my question to my instant response team is that, can you see it? So my party trick is I would go with my report, my pen test report, and is to say, can you tell me what's in here? Because if you can't tell me what's in here, I'm adding another finding, which is a high one to this thing. Because if you don't have enough visibility to what I just did to your application and your company and your customers and your data, you have a bigger problem than whatever I'm going to show you next. So when we actually have the bug bounty stuff, and when we have vulnerabilities, first thing I would go to my instance response team and say, can you find it? Can you tell me what they did? Because if you can, I'm more worried that we don't have enough visibility to what's going on in our environments.
Yeah.
Right? So a pen test should be a validation of what you know already, right?
Yeah, and also, unfortunately, in some of the standards like PCI, it's also a mandatory requirement. So it almost is a ticking box.
Well, look, I think you can get a lot of value from it, right? I think but you shouldn't view it as a way to. I always take the view that I'm not paying somebody for them to show me how good they are, right? I'm going to pay somebody to give me an independent validation of our assumptions in security.
Yeah. But going back to what we said about developers or engineers should care about security, but don't necessarily need to know how to. Don't necessarily. I can't remember how you worded it, James. Your wording was.
They should care, but not have to think about it.
That's it. They should care, but not have to think about it. But in a situation where perhaps you're running scanning tools, you find a vulnerability, you do need to have that ability to assess whether it's a false positive, how much of a risk that is, because it could come out as a high risk because of the tool you're using, but actually, in the context of all the other controls in place around that particular piece of code, is actually quite low. There's need to understand that. So therefore, they do need to think about security as well as coding security.
Yeah, but in order to assess that, they actually need to also understand the business element, right? They need to understand the impact of,
or at least the controls.
Yeah.
And some of those could be technical controls, or business controls.
Yeah. So if you look at, sorry, did that? You want to make a point? I think we interrupted you.
No.
So okay, looking at it from a DevSecOps training or sessions that we can do that will attract and help them, what are sessions that we should do at the summit for DevSecOps individuals?
And this is what we already have.
So
just for discussion. I don't know if you guys can see it properly.
So one of the things that is important to the DevSecOps one, I think, is the threat modeling exercise. It's understanding what potential threats could occur within your the piece of code that you're writing or the feature you're developing. That is also an education piece as well, isn't it? It helps the teams to understand. It helps to spread that knowledge out amongst the rest of the team. So, and I see you've already got some sessions on threat modeling. So, is it a case of rather than having something specific for DevSecOps in terms of that, you say to the people who do DevSecOps, you also should attend the threat modeling exercises and see how threat modeling works, because that's important to DevSecOps.
Yeah.
Also, this session is quite would be quite useful for DevSecOps people. ASVS user stories. That would be quite practical for them.
Yeah, and that's what I was when I was talking about creating this sort of view or calendar for security champions. I think DevSecOps probably makes sense to also try to do the same thing, where, you know, because what he's basically kind of saying is that, you know, a DevSecOps would be interested in threat modeling, would be interested in the user stories, would be interested in this risk view of security, right? And I think they can provide a lot of value for it because they are the practitioners, right? They're the ones who actually, in the real world, can say, well, that wouldn't matter because of X.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. So we're going to create a channel for us to talk about those tabletop exercises. And I think we got some really cool topics here. Like I really love the guerrilla security champion sessions. What to do when your security teams are not supporting you. I think that's a great session.
And we're gonna have a deep dive next week. I'm gonna do another doodle for this registrants to this session, so that we can go through the scenario stuff.
Yeah. Brilliant. Any final comments for today's session?
Good.
Good. Sorry. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening, and I might see you tomorrow. I might see you next week.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.